Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show.
As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity, we will stand with your people, and we also want you to win.
Rishi Sunak backs Israel's right to defend itself during a meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as civilian casualties continue to mount in Gaza. I'll be getting the latest on the UK government's visit to the region from our business correspondent Simon Pusey. And geopolitical fragmentation may have taken the shine off of Xi Jinping's two-day Belt and Road Summit, but the global gathering has been described as China's most important diplomatic event ever. Why? I'll be asking Linda Calabrese, the research fellow at global affairs think tank ODI, will shortly be joining me in the studio. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. But first, South Africa is set to briefly overtake Nigeria and Egypt as the continent's largest economy next year. This is according to forecasts from the International Monetary Fund. The IMF's World Economic Outlook envisions South Africa's GDP to reach $401 billion next year, ahead of Nigeria's $395 billion. Nigeria's economy has previously eclipsed all others in the region, but fortunes have been dimmed as the new administration grapples with runaway inflation and a deep plunge in the value of the naira. More from South Africa. The government will consider a proposal on whether to include the Netherlands and Denmark in its landmark $8.5 billion climate finance pact with some of the world's richest nations. The Just Energy Transition Partnership was announced at the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow 2 years ago, but its implementation has been bogged down by delays and opposition from coal miners. The pact was created to help South Africa reduce its reliance on coal, which is used to produce more than 80% of the country's electricity. Cyril Ramaphosa is hoping to produce a long-delayed plan for the agreement, which would allow funds to flow by the start of COP28 meeting in Dubai next month. The British Prime Minister met with his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, and President Isaac Herzog, expressing his personal condolences for the horrific loss of life in Israel as a result of Hamas terrorism. During the visit, he reiterated that the UK stands in solidarity with Israel and firmly believes in the country's right to self-defence, in line with international law. Earlier this week, a £10 million aid package was announced by the government in response to the escalating conflict in Gaza. The UK Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is also in the region and is expected to meet leaders in Egypt, Turkey and Qatar to help prevent the conflict spreading across the region. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, so on Wednesday, the Foreign Office confirmed that a seventh Brit has been confirmed dead following the deadly attack in Israel two Saturdays ago now. 10 Brits still remain missing. Rishi Sunak and James Cleverly are in the region. What are we expecting from talks with Israeli officials?
Yeah, so Rishi Sunak has been meeting also families of those who have people missing, obviously hundreds of hostages still missing. And I think those numbers are going to rise in terms of the number of Brits. There's a lot of Europeans who are still missing or are feared dead. So you're seeing a lot of world leaders going over there. Obviously, President Biden was over there. And Rishi Sunak saying he was very moved by meeting the families of the victims and people who've gone missing. I think the general messaging from the UK is that, like with America, shoulder to shoulder with Netanyahu and with Israel and against terrorism, saying that Israel has both the right and the duty to protect itself and its civilians. I think an underlying message also, though, is that basically no one wants this to escalate any further. There's the chance that this could go throughout the Middle East. That's not what anyone wants. That's not what the West wants, certainly. So I think while the public message is we are with you, you have the right to defend yourselves, solidarity, etc. There's this undercurrent, and I think behind the scenes they may be saying just be careful with a ground incursion into Gaza. I think there's military analysts are saying this could be a trap set by Hamas. It's an area that they don't know too well. There's a lot of very dense. There's a lot of tunnels. There's a lot of places that they could get cornered or trapped. And that while they have hundreds of thousands of troops sort of on the border of Gaza ready to go in, the last week or so that they haven't suggests that maybe they're holding back for those reasons. Maybe that they're sort of, but yeah, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak saying that Palestinians are victims of what Hamas has done too, and it's important we provide humanitarian access. So that's another thing that we're hearing from Rishi Sunak and James Cleverly, is that it's important that we get aid in. And remember, we've got a huge Palestinian population here and around the world as well. So it's a difficult balance for these world leaders to, on the one hand, have been partners with Israel and with President Netanyahu for many years now, and they need to maintain that, but they also don't want to upset the Palestinian population here within the UK.
And see a genocide or a massacre.
Well, of course, yeah, they don't want anything like that to happen, and they don't want this to spill out into, because what could easily happen is the Israeli forces move in, blow everything up, kill hundreds of thousands of people, and then you've got a potential world war on your hands, or you've got a huge conflict in the Middle East that could spill over. So I think that's really what's happening. They're going over there to show solidarity, but then maybe behind the scenes they're just saying, be careful, what's your plan? And I think that's what Joe Biden's been doing the last few days as well. So I think that's the general issue there. Of course, it's not easy, but I think in front of the cameras, it is very much solidarity with the Israeli people. And as you say, lots of Brits caught up in this, and lots of Europeans caught up in this, and Americans. So, it's a really, really difficult time.
All of us, isn't it? Just very briefly, Simon, how has Tuesday's hospital attack changed the nature of this war? You mentioned that now in Rishi Sunak's press statements, we are starting to hear about support for the Palestinian people. Do you think the rhetoric has been dialed down by Britain?
Well, it's really hard, isn't it? Because, again, Israel are denying that that's anything that they've done. And they say they've got evidence that it's another, hardline group, not Hamas, but another one. So they're denying it. But you can't not feel sympathy for the people of Palestine when you see pictures like that and the images that come out of that. Hundreds and hundreds of people, innocent people dead from a hospital. Who is doing that? And so, obviously, fingers will be pointed at Israel because they are bombing Gaza, but you can't rule out anything at this stage. So I think that probably only increases the need for humanitarian aid to get into that area. And at the moment, that isn't really happening. They've sealed it off and they're not letting anyone in or out. So I think that's probably why maybe world leaders are really clamoring to get over there now and to say, whoa, we need to open some corridors for humanitarian aid to make sure that this already terrible, terrible crisis doesn't get even worse.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
24 leaders and more than 100 delegations, largely from the Global South, came together for a packed schedule of forums and bilateral meetings revolving around Chinese leader Xi Jinping's signature Belt and Road Initiative. The global infrastructure drive is now a decade in the making and has cemented China's place as a major international player. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by Linda Calabrese, a research fellow at the global affairs think tank ODI. Linda Calabrese, it's a pleasure to have you in the Channel's Business Global studio. The crisis in the Middle East means that President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Forum isn't getting as much global attention as it might have. Talk to us about some of the major talking points we may have missed.
Well, of course. So I think the main talking point that we have is, at least among those of us who follow this forum, is what is the Belt and Road going to look like in the next 10 years? So we've just reached the 10th anniversary of the initiative, which was launched or announced in 2013. And so we're 10 years in. What has changed? What is going to change in the next decade? So we've been talking about, how the finance will look like, how the projects will look like. So the initiative itself has changed quite a lot in the past few years. New countries have joined. In fact, since the initiative was launched, I think from the initial plan that included mostly Europe and Asia, we now have pretty much the entire world has joined in.
It's huge, isn't it?
It's huge. It now includes the African continent as well. It wasn't part of the original plan, but now many, many African countries have joined the initiative. So from 2017 to 2019, 2020, there's many African countries now that are part of the initiative.
Absolutely. And I know our Vice President, Kashim Shettima, is there. That's him that we're showing now with Xi Jinping representing President Tinubu. As you said, it's 10 years since the inception. we know the world has changed dramatically since then. A lot of people are wondering whether Xi's foreign policy ambition is running out of steam. I know that we have had positive GDP data from China early this week, but there are issues with the economy, aren't there?
Of course, I mean, the Chinese economy is changing, of course, as China grows, but its growth cannot continue indefinitely as it used to be. So things are, of course, slowing down. At the same time, things are changing for the countries that are part of the Belt and Road as well. So if we think about African countries, for example, at the beginning, they were, borrowing a lot from China because of, we were at the tail end of the commodity boom. There was a lot of money that could be used to repay all this lending. We're not in that situation anymore. So now the global economy definitely has shifted. So that means a recalibration of the initiative. Many people kind of say that the BRI was going to end at some point because, there's not so much lending anymore. There's not so many projects.
Just can't afford it.
Correct. But what is happening in reality is that things are changing rather than being completely dismantled. So we see that maybe lending is losing a little bit of its importance or its esteem, but we also see that there's different sources of finance coming in. There's more injections into equity investment, for example. There's more emphasis on private capital or companies being part of the Belt and Road.
Absolutely, and more involvement by Putin, I can only imagine. You've mentioned the lending landscape, particularly on the continent of Africa. We've got some data here from a peak of $28.4 billion in 2016. China issued just $994 million to African governments in 2022. This is the lowest levels of Chinese lending to Africa since 2004. I know that William Ruto, the president of Kenya, has asked for $1 billion or something this week. Why has the lending dropped so dramatically?
I think there's been a lot of learning in the past 10 years of what has gone well, what hasn't gone well.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of understanding that a lot of large infrastructure projects, especially if they're not very specifically tied to economic development, may not be making as much money as it was originally envisaged. So there's definitely a shift from these very large infrastructure projects to what the Chinese government is now calling small and beautiful or small and impactful projects. So maybe the Chinese government lends a little less, or it lends as a small part of a larger project, but the impact has to be there. The sort of like the social results, the social outcomes of the projects have to be there. So we're moving towards a landscape where it's not anymore the big roads and ports. It's maybe smaller projects that are more impactful.
Absolutely. We said the forum, or the BRI initiative is 10 years old. Xi's leadership is also 10 years old. Do you think Xi kind of looks at the criticism that the West have put on its diplomacy with Africa? On this show, we've discussed with several experts about concerns they have of debt traps, debt diplomacy, white elephant projects, really cheap infrastructure on projects where we'd expect them to last for years. Is he aware of that? Do you think that's also shaping his relationship with Africa?
I think definitely the Chinese government is aware of that, and definitely they use that as a learning lesson to change what they're doing. So, for example, there was a lot of criticism on the debt distress that some of these projects were causing, and then there's been this recalibration towards smaller projects, or maybe towards
debt resolution.
Correct. There's been a lot of challenges around the climate impact of these projects. And so we're now moving towards greening the Belt and Road Initiative. So definitely the Chinese government sort of listens and tries to change and improve on what they have been doing. And we see this happening over the years and now all consolidated in Xi's keynote speech at the Belt and Road Forum, but also the white paper that was issued just a few days before the forum that basically emphasizes green projects, clean projects, projects where integrity is at the forefront. So there's a lot of emphasis on Chinese state-owned enterprises and construction companies respecting local regulations and complying with ESG standards and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Well, it's a mammoth project, and if it does eventually kick off, then surely it's going to benefit the global economy as a whole. Linda Calabrese, a research fellow at the Global Affairs think tank ODI. Thank you so much for your time and insights today.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, early next week, the Centre for Commonwealth Affairs will be hosting a roundtable discussion between Nigeria and British business leaders in the Palace of Westminster, with an aim of boosting ties between the two two nations. Sam Bidwell, the director of the centre, will soon be joining me here in the studio with more insights about the event. And of course, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be sharing an interview I conducted with Sam Bidwell, the director of the Centre for Commonwealth Affairs. But until then, here's a breakdown of the biggest business news stories of the week. Qatar has agreed to supply Shell with natural gas for 27 years, further expanding its long-term supply to Europe. Under the deal, Qatar Energy will supply the Netherlands with 3.5 million tonnes of liquefied natural gas every single year. European oil majors are moving to sign some of the longest and biggest LNG contracts as the region prepares for its second winter without Russian supplies. Including the Shell contract, Qatar has so far committed to sending Europe about 18.8 million tonnes of LNG per annum. Rolls-Royce Holdings has announced plans to eliminate as many as 2,500 jobs worldwide, which is the equivalent to about 6% of its global staff. The aero engine maker struggled during the COVID pandemic and was forced to raise billions of pounds to support the business. About half of the firm's employees are based in the UK, with 11,000 staff in Germany and a further 5,500 in America. A trade-in update from Condé Nast has revealed that sales of their glossy magazines have slumped by a fifth. The owner of Vogue, Tatler and Vanity Fair say newsstand and subscription revenues in Europe fell by a fifth to £42.4 million in 2022. Under the stewardship of Anna Wintour, who is now Condé Nast's chief content officer, Vogue established itself as a fashion bible, shaping luxury popular culture. The company has reduced print issues of US Vogue to just 10 publications a year, while some titles, such as Glamour magazine, have gone digital only. Now to my final topic. The Centre for Commonwealth Affairs was set up earlier this year to give the Commonwealth an active and sustained voice in the UK's policy conversation. Following a recent visit to Nigeria for meetings with business leaders across lucrative industries, the group will hold a roundtable discussion in Parliament next week. Sam Bidwell, the director at the Centre, joined me earlier in the studio for more on this. Sam Bidwell, thank you for joining me in the Channel's Business Global studio, avoiding the rain because I know it's chucking it in the British capital at the moment. Talk to me, please, about the pan-Commonwealth policy and what exactly it's been set up to achieve.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. And as you can see, I haven't quite avoided the rain. But yeah, to say a little bit more about what we're doing, I am the director of the Centre for Commonwealth Affairs. We were established earlier this year, incorporated in January, launched officially in April. And what we work on is pan-Commonwealth policy. So that's looking at the network of 56 countries that is the Commonwealth, 2.7 billion people, some of the world's most fast-growing and largest economies. And it's looking at how membership of that network can deliver benefit for member states and for the citizens of those member states, whether that's through technical cooperation, through development cooperation, through collective bargaining at international institutions. So we look at a range of different issues and explore really how the network can deliver value for its members.
Yeah, that's very timely because, of course, Nigeria is a member of the Commonwealth. We have spoken to the Secretary-General, Baroness Patricia Scotland, several times on the show, but it does appear as if you were in a very crowded, competitive geopolitical bloc at the moment. In the first half of the show, we were talking about the Belt and Road Initiative. It's in its 10th anniversary. That's not getting that much headlines because, of course, there are geopolitical fragmentations, but there are several regional blocs. Do you find that the Commonwealth is losing its voice? Is it more difficult to shape or influence global discourse?
So BRI is a good example. I think there are two trends that we see in the world today at the kind of macro long-term level. Yeah. One is that countries are thinking multilaterally. Yes. They're thinking about diversifying partnerships. They're thinking about striking out into the world as they develop and seeing who can give them a good deal. Yeah. And two, countries are thinking about development. They're thinking about what partnerships, what membership of what organizations can deliver tangible economic benefit to my populations and to the country that I'm trying to run. BRI is one of those avenues, absolutely, and so is the Commonwealth. And actually, I think this moment is a real opportunity for the Commonwealth. We've got a new head of the Commonwealth following the passing of Her Majesty a year ago now. We've had 2 new members join in 2022.
Yes, Francophone.
Yes, two new Francophone members. There are others queuing up, conversations about Ireland, Angola, other countries. So rather than seeing BRI as a sort of competitor, we might instead see it as an indication that organisations like the Commonwealth have got a space in the modern world, provided that they can make that evolution, to make the leap of evolution into the modern age that will be required. I think that will mean making the Commonwealth less Anglo-centric. I think it will mean focusing more on what the Commonwealth can do in practical economic terms for its member states, which is exactly what we're talking about here. And it will also be about saying, well, if countries are going to develop, it's best that they develop with partners that they can trust, as we've seen in Zambia and in Sri Lanka. China can be a pretty tricky customer. Closure of airports in Zambia, closure of ports in Sri Lanka, absolutely. Chinese build. Debt diplomacy, as they say, which is a huge issue. And the Commonwealth, I think, offers a compelling alternative to that is slightly more equitable.
Absolutely. There's certainly, it appears to be that there are closer historic ties, which what the member states enjoy with the Commonwealth. Talk to me more about Nigeria. Of course, the vast majority of the people watching this interview will be based in that country. I know you were recently there, and next week in the Palace of Westminster, you'll be hosting some sort of round table to boost, is it trade relations?
So it's more broad-based than that. It's about the broader diplomatic and strategic relationship between the UK and Nigeria. Nigeria is a very exciting place.
It is.
We were out there, as you say, last week. We were in Lagos and Abuja.
I think we're showing those pictures.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. And it's you can tell that there is real growth, real opportunity. Whoever you talk to, there is something exciting happening. Challenges also, of course, but the UK there, despite, in my view, failing to deliver in the last couple of decades, still has a good reputation, still broadly well liked. Of course, not just about the UK, it's also about India, Singapore, Canada, Australia.
The Commonwealth.
The Commonwealth family as a whole, of which Nigeria is a part. And so we went over, we decided to speak to as many stakeholders as possible. We spoke to about 110 stakeholders across about 6 industries, looking at topics as varied as creative industries, education, finance and fintech, manufacturing. I was really impressed by the work being done by the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria Export Group to try and boost non-oil exports. I was very, very impressed by the work being done at the Small and Medium Enterprises Development Agency. Smedden, yes. Yeah. So lots happening. We were basically going on a fact-finding mission to find out what we can do in policy terms to help deliver on the ambitions of those sectors. And that's
important, isn't it? It's not just about, the nice pictures and the beautiful dinners and the talk shops. I think a lot of us, we've been to several events, really well intended, but it's about action, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we're in the process of following up with members now. We intend to produce a piece of research by the end of the year, which will set out some tangible steps. Because as you say, what everybody said to us, whatever their political persuasion, whatever their sector, was, when we have this conversation, you absolutely must go back to the UK, you must do something about this, you must talk to our government and your government and see what we can do, put heads together. That's exactly what we intend to do. Part of that process is this event on the 24th at the Palace of Westminster.
We're running out of time. Briefly, Sam, tell me what you're hoping to achieve on Tuesday.
Sure. Well, we want to deliver those findings to interested UK stakeholders. That includes the High Commissioner. That will also hopefully include members of the British Parliament, both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And it will be to say, well, this is a two-way street relationship. We've been to Nigeria, we've spoken to people, here's what we heard. What can we do here to deliver it? And it's about that two-way street.
Absolutely, it is. And of course, we are all enjoying the fruits of the close ties between Britain and Nigeria. Long may it last. And do use us as a bridge to announce any of those updates, because we know the change makers do watch. Sam Bidwell, Director of the Centre for Commonwealth Affairs. It's been great having you in the studio.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.